Hello everyone, I'm Cara. Welcome. We have a lot of information and a short period of time to give it to you. We could actually probably do this in about 4 or 5 hours if we really wanted to do a full-on training. So it will be a little bit more brief than I would personally like it to be. But it is a lot of information that I think is important to have. I am from the north. I know I talk real fast. If I talk too fast, let me know. I'll slow down. But I get going, so just stop me if you can. All right. So what we're going to look at, and I'm going to try my darndest to get to all the objectives on our list, but we're going to look at the relationship between substance abuse and eating disorders. Through that, we're going to introduce the idea of food addiction. Food addiction is a new hot topic that's out there. There's a lot of research done on it, and there's a lot of controversy on it. So we'll talk a little bit about that too. Valerie is going to go into more of the dietetic side of it, and then I'll talk a little bit more about some of the research or some of the conflicting views that are going on within it. And then, of course, we'll look at the relationship between eating disorders and substance abuse. All right, so before we start, we're actually just going to go over the DSM criteria. I do still have the DSM-IV on here, which was kind of silly, but I printed out for you guys the APA handouts that they sent out with the DSM-V came out of changes that are happening in feeding and eating disorders, as well as substance-related and addictive disorders. So I have that for you guys, and I also included it in the slides as well. So we'll start with the eating disorders. So first we have anorexia nervosa. That one, what's changed, because this is still the DSM-IV. If I move my head, are you guys losing my voice? No, okay. What's changed in this one is, I don't know, is there a pointer thing on here? Is that if you see an A, it says refusal to maintain body weight at or above normally weight, age, and height. They have actually taken that word out. So the word refusal has been taken out for the DSM-V. But a lot of it still is the same of the intense fear of gaining weight, disturbance in the way in which one's body weight or shape is experienced, undue influence of body weight or shape on self-evaluation, or even denial of the seriousness of low body weight. So that would be someone who weighs about 90 pounds, who sits there and you can tell that they're unhealthy, they're having heart palpitations, they don't have enough body fat on them to maintain their temperature, they are getting sick really easily, but then they're saying, no, I'm really healthy, I'm fine, it's not about my weight, I just get a cold, people are sick all the time, I just get germs real easy, and really not having the understanding that, boy, probably that low body weight is also playing a role in this.
I think refusal is a very important aspect because I thought that it begins as a conscious decision not to eat.
Well, that would be something that kind of the DSM-V did, and there's a lot of changes that happen in the DSM-V that are really interesting. So what they talk about is, so when they say one of the reasons that they no longer include the term refusal, according to the APA, in terms of weight maintenance, since that implies intention on the part of the patient and can be difficult to assess. So I guess that's one of the hard parts, is that it's really hard to assess the idea of refusal. So that they're trying to take out, what's happening with the DSM-V is, in DSM-IV, a lot of people were being diagnosed with ED-NOS. And what we're trying to do, or what they're trying to do, not me, I'm not part of that, is to make folks kind of fall more into a specific category. Because when you have a DSM criteria and most people are falling into not otherwise specified, then we have something going wrong in the criterion. And so that's one of the reasons that they're changing a lot of it, is to make sure people are fitting into the categories that they need to be fitting into. And then D has actually been completely removed in the DSM-V. And one of the reasons is that when you have amenorrhea on there, well, we're automatically discluding males, right? Hopefully. I don't know. We're discluding the males. We're also discluding anyone who is post-menarchal, so anyone who might be in menopause, anyone who just doesn't normally have their period, anyone who's on birth control. So there's like birth controls out there that you can have your period every few months or not have it at all. And it also takes it out because there's folks who still exhibit anorexic behaviors but haven't lost their period. And so if they're still having it, it was preventing them from being diagnosed with anorexia, even though they were still having that significantly low body weight, that intense fear of gaining weight, all the other criteria were being met. Yeah.
What if a person weighed, say they were 300 pounds, and they decide they're going to stop eating, and they get all the way down to 90 pounds? Is that fitting in there?
That would be very concerning. Yeah, she said, what if I have someone who's 300 pounds and they decide they want to lose weight and they drop drastically down to 90 pounds? It would be very concerning. It would be hard to know if we would diagnose them with anorexia or bulimia or anything like that without having more criteria of how they were losing the weight, but it would certainly be concerning, and it actually might fall, depending on what their behaviors are, into what they now call orthorexia, not an official term, but a term that's used in the eating disorder community. Orthorexia, we'll go over it in just a sec. Yeah, I do have a slide on that. They've also decreased their length of time for binging, purging, and or restricting. And that's just to be more inclusive, because they found that some people were doing the behaviors maybe only once a week, but still exhibiting the behaviors often enough where we would want to include them into this criteria as opposed to NOS. Bulimia nervosa is the recurrent episodes of binge eating. An episode of binge eating is characterized by both of the following: eating in a discrete period of time, any amount of food that is definitely larger than most would eat, and a sense of lack of control. So that's a really key one right there, of lack of control. So that's a behavioral thing. It's very similar to when we talk about with addiction, one is too many and 1,000's not enough. Almost that start eating and I just can't stop. I have to get as much in as possible. And then they have to have a recurrent, inappropriate compensatory behavior. That's one of the big differences from anorexia, is that this one's got the compensatory behavior part to it. And so those not only include the vomiting or laxative use, but it's also things like diuretics, enemas, other medications, Epicac, use of Adderall to prevent eating, if they feel like they've eaten too much before, fasting, or excessive exercise. In the DSM-IV, it said both occur on average at least twice a week for 3 months. That has actually dropped down to once a week for 3 months, and that's the new DSM-V. I want to make sure I catch all the stuff that's in the DSM that changed. Yeah, that's the big one that changed for bulimia, was just the amount and frequency. They've got the purging type and the non-purging type. Purging type is the vomiting, but it's also the use of laxatives or diuretics. The non-purging is going to be more of the fasting, the excessive exercise, and so it's obviously not anything leaving the body. Binge eating disorder, this is the one that is brand new to the DSM-V. It was not in the DSM-IV. It was kind of a subcategory. This is the one that gets researchers and the community battling between, is it binge eating disorder, is it food addiction, is it eating addiction? But I really like how they've added it in the DSM-V. Let's see. All right, so it's included, it's very similar to what is required in the bulimia, of the eating in a discrete amount of time, any amount of food that is larger than most would eat, and then a sense of lack of control of eating during the episode. Then it's got 3 or more of those following, which is eating more rapidly than normal, eating until uncomfortably full, eating when not physically hungry, embarrassment, guilt, shame, an emotional distress that happens when they do engage in this eating behavior. They say binge eating, for it to be diagnosed in this, occurs on average at least once a week for 3 months. And of course, it's not used with anything that falls under bulimia or anorexia. So this one is really interesting if you're working with an eating disorder client. A lot of my eating disordered patients come in and they'll tell me, Cara, I binged last night. Okay, so what did you eat? Tell me about that. Well, I had a bowl of sour cream and onion puffs, like the Trader Joe puffs. And then like an hour later, I had some leftover chips and salsa that my sister brought home from the restaurant. And then I had a sandwich. Okay. So, and part of the role is helping them understand that's not binge eating. That's actually probably a little bit more normal than what they've been eating before. But because they're used to restricting and not eating a lot, it feels like a binge to them. So there's a lot of education that happens around this. And what I tell them is binging is actually eating at about 81.5 calories per minute. The average person eats at about 38.4 calories per minute. So that's really helpful for them to see that of, what really constitutes a binge and what's really a normal behavior that you struggle with feeling comfortable with. And that's where a lot of that kind of coping skills come in, learning how to eat in a healthy way. But when they get the idea, if it's a binge, then all of a sudden it's, this is bad, I can't eat like this, I can't eat like this again. And then they get afraid to start eating because they're afraid even a normal amount of food is a binge. So it's a lot of education. That's one of my new fun facts. I really love that. It's really helpful to have. Patients really, or clients really respond to having kind of that specific number.
Does that talk about just time chewing, and once they're done with, or do you count like the time they feel full and wait until they eat another thing?
It would be in the full time that they eat. So that would be like someone, if they're binge eating, who is eating a large pizza, a bag of chips, a package of cookies in like an hour and a half. That would be kind of that total an hour and a half. That's how many calories per minute they consumed. Yeah.
You tell people to go to an all-you-can-eat buffet 3 times a week.
Well, and that is one of the things that is a question on this is what is eating addiction and understanding the difference between binge eating disorder and overeating. And there is a difference, and I think that sometimes we get, in the society that we're in, portions are really large, things have changed a lot, that we end up overeating, and we can sometimes confuse that with a binge. The difference would be is if someone goes to the buffet 3 times a week and they're eating, they're probably not having the guilt, the shame, the depression, the emotional distress that's occurring with it. If they were having the emotional distress, going to the buffet and stuffing themselves full, I would say, yeah, let's take a look at that. Is that binge eating disorder? So I guess it would depend on what are they having. Yes.
It's such a fine line when you're trying to describe this that we'll talk about later on too. A lot of it is perception. You can't hear her.
She said it's a fine line between the two of them, and a lot of it is based on perception. Sorry, she'll get a microphone, I promise. So that is the binge eating disorder. Really glad that it's in the DSM-V. It does capture a lot of the people that were falling into NOS. It also has just a different set of coping skills and recovery skills than something that anorexia or bulimia would have. It's also good because people falling into this with a diagnosis, it's easier to get them into treatment when we have a DSM code, because then the doctors and insurance companies and all of that can actually say, oh yes, this is recognized as something, let's get them in here. Before it was really hard to do that. Body dysmorphic disorder is also another big one that has popped up, and a lot of it is due to kind of social, marketing, TV shows, magazines, all, where you see all the celebrities of who's too thin, who's too fat, best and worst beach bodies, all of that. And so we definitely see that there's a lot more of the body dysmorphic disorder that is popping up. And it really is a preoccupation with perceived defects in their physical appearance. So an example would be if someone come in, my nose is so big. Okay, no, it's like so big that I feel like I'm an elephant. Like I look at it and I've got this mini trunk coming out of my nose. And the real part of that is they believe that. They believe it is so big and so noticeable, and it causes them such distress. They're afraid to go out of the house. They try to draw attention to other parts of their face or other parts of their body through their clothes or what they wear. But it's a real belief that there's something wrong with them. It's a cognitive distortion within that. And at some point during the course, they have repetitive grooming behaviors, mirror checking, excessive grooming, reassurance seeking, skin picking. So that is the person who's like in the mirror, okay, all right, I'm good. And then they walk in the mall, and every reflective glass, they're probably checking themselves out and looking. That would be some of that excessive grooming or mirror checking. It causes significant distress, anxiety, depression. I've got someone I'm working with. She won't go out of the house except for coming to her appointments, which she's 15 minutes late to every single appointment because she's putting her makeup on, and she doesn't feel that she's good enough before she leaves the house. So I'm always there for her when at noontime, but she comes at about 12:15. I'm sorry. I was just finishing everything up. I was reapplying my lipstick. Really significant anxiety and distress of even leaving the house. And then she goes to work. Other than that, she stays in her basement. She watches TV, but she doesn't go out very often unless she spends hours in front of the mirror putting on her makeup. Then maybe she'll go out to the bar with her friend. And it's not restricted to concerns with body fat or weight. So this is more than just what, like, I weigh or body fat. It's specific physical appearances. Muscle dysmorphia is a form of body dysmorphic disorder. That one is what we a lot of times see in males. And so that's the belief that someone's body or build is too small or insufficiently muscular. So a lot of times we see that in more males. And typically when you're diagnosing a male with something like anorexia or bulimia, there's a different set of questions you do want to ask them. They have less of a drive for thinness and more of a drive for like fitness and muscularity. And so it's important if you're asking them the typical questions, do you want to be thin? What does thin mean to you? Do you have a drive for thinness? They're going to say, well, no, I don't. I have a drive for that six-pack and like really defined biceps and that beach body, all that fun stuff. And you like that flexing? I saw her laugh at me. And then a lot of times they're also characterized by good or fair insight, poor insight, or even absent insight. They do have a new scale that's out for the body dysmorphic disorder. It looks like this. And it asks kind of, on average, how much time is occupied by these symptoms, how much distress do you have, how hard is it for you to control, how much do these symptoms cause you to avoid doing anything, going any place, or being with anyone, and how much do these symptoms interfere with school, work, social, or family life. So really taking a look at holistically and kind of all different areas, how is this impacting them. Orthorexia nervosa is a term that is used a lot, but it is not an official DSM term. I just want to be clear on that. It is a term that's used in the ED field, and basically it's kind of that fixation on righteous eating. So the healthy foods, the macrobiotic diets, diets for specific blood types, usually to achieve health and purity, and that's a really big one. And those are the friends that might say, I have a gluten intolerance or I'm gluten sensitive, when really they're not, but they want to avoid it and they need a reason to be able to do that. Or it's I'm on the paleo diet, or I'm on, what's a really big one that's out? It's not paleo. The raw food diet, or so all these diets. Well, what happens when someone is so restricted on the diet plan that they have? I'm sorry? They want to eat everything, so they might get into that really defiant, whatever I do what I want kind of thing, right? What else might happen?
I'm actually on paleo. What it means to me is that I make choices when I go out to a restaurant as to what I think is a healthier piece, a healthier thing to eat.
That's the healthy version of the paleo. Paleo.
Yeah. 80-20 idea, which is 80% of the time I do the best I can, and 20% of the time I eat fair.
I really like that. That's a good place. So that would be a very healthy version of that. The orthorexia would be the unhealthy version, which would be, no, I'm only eating this paleo diet, and this is what I have to have, and these are the only things that I can eat with it, so I'm going to stay home and cook my own meals, but you guys go out and have fun.
I can't help but thinking, and I've been in the field a long time, that listening to all these things, sometimes I'm thinking people use food many times as a defense mechanism of coping. So when we're getting so picky and watching what everybody's doing, when you take these defense mechanisms away, you're going to have a much greater problem.
You have a lot of people walking around vulnerable.
Damage control. I teach disorders in college, and I tell them it has to interfere significantly with your ability to survive. You label people, or else everybody is labeled as anybody else.
Well, that's what this is. This isn't anyone who's just on those diets. This is those who take those diets to the extreme. It is. Well, that's why it's not a DSM diagnosis. This is one that's just kind of used around. It's not one that, and you can put on a coding to send to an insurance company. They're going to be like, what the heck is this? I don't know what this is. But it is one that's just a term that's used when someone doesn't fit into it, and kind of clinicians are trying to work with one another or to explain a little bit to their clients of, why is this distressing to you? Why is it not working? Someone who's got the extreme version of some of these diets, they're going to avoid going out with their friends. They're going to become really isolative, or they're going to isolate around people who also kind of follow within that. They get really fearful of foods that don't fall into that diet, or situations where they might run into occurrences where they can't have specifically what they feel they want or need to eat. There's a sense of that kind of that achieve health and purity. So, I can't have that because it's saturated fats and those are really bad for you. I only eat clean food, so I'm just going to have coconut oil or whatever. But it's to the extreme where they cannot or really are unable to have flexibility. It's a very rigid way of thinking. Like I said, it's not a DSM criteria, but it is something that is used in the field as a term that pretty often. And if you guys are interested, NEDA, National Eating Disorder Association, has a whole page on orthorexia if you guys want more information on that. And here's actually one of kind of answers a little bit the question that you were asking of some articles that I found of when orthorexia becomes all-consuming. So for this guy, Dr. Bratman, who is recovering from orthorexia, states, I pursued wellness through healthy eating for years, but gradually I began to sense that something was going wrong. The poetry of my life was disappearing. My ability to carry on normal conversations was hindered by thoughts of food. The need to obtain meals free of meat, fat, and artificial chemicals had put nearly all social forms of eating beyond my reach. I was lonely and obsessed. I had been seduced by righteous eating. The problem of my life's meaning had been transferred inexorably to food, and I could not claim it. So that's kind of that thought process that he had going on in his orthorexia of trying to find meals that were meat-free, fat-free, artificial colors and foods and whatever is free, and that obsession that kind of occurred for him. So that's kind of one person's take on what that was like for them. And then another question is, are you telling me it's unhealthy to follow a healthy diet? That's also a really great article. Just because you're on a healthy diet does not mean you're orthorexic. There's a line that gets crossed. These are other eating disorders in the DSM-IV. I believe in the DSM-V, feeding disorder is now avoidant restrictive food intake. And I think some of the numbers change. I also apologize. I didn't even think to do that until this morning of putting in ICD-10. For those of you who aren't aware, ICD-10 officially got approved to be used. It's going to go into effect October 1st, 2015. ICD-10 doesn't necessarily affect those of us in private practice depending on what you use to code. A lot of times DSM-V is sufficient, but it will affect folks who might run a place like Farley or the Pavilion, depending on the type of practice that you run. So just be aware of the ICD-10. One fun fact that I did find out is because that is a federal-based coding system, the ICD-10 is actually free to you. So if you go online, you can download the entire ICD-10 manual onto your computer, no charge. If you buy it in a bookstore, they're going to charge you for the paper and the printing, but because it's federal, you can't charge for the actual content of it. So if you guys are interested in that or want it, download it, have it for you. It's really good to have. Be aware, just that change is coming up. Okay, so let's take a look at the substance abuse. Again, I have the DSM-IV on here instead of DSM-V. I apologize. As we know in DSM-V, they changed substance abuse and substance dependence to substance use disorder. So they kind of put it on a spectrum of from mild to severe. So it's got alcohol use disorder, stimulant use disorder, opiate use disorder. I actually think, is there caffeine use disorder in it now? Yeah, and I think they put cannabis use disorder in there too. So they separate that.
William and Mary who had a caffeine intoxication.
Wow.
He had 10 cups of coffee in 3 hours.
Wow.
Yeah, it was fun.
And I know that these withdrawal symptoms, I have a girl who was drinking 3 liters of Diet Coke a day. She went into treatment, and they wouldn't let her have it. She had migraines and withdrawal symptoms for 3 days. So there is a withdrawal pattern that happens. So substance abuse and substance dependence are now kind of in one category, but broken down into 10 different substances, and it's on the thing from mild to severe. And previously, where the diagnosis of substance abuse required only 1 symptom, mild substance use disorder requires 2 to 3 symptoms from a set of 11, which are similar to the failure to fulfill role obligations, substance abuse in situations, which is physically hazardous, legal problems. Now, the legal problem one, I think, is one that was really interesting for them to take out of the DSM-V. And I think a lot of it is based on cultural implications and the legal systems within that. So my understanding is that it got taken out, and I can't, because I know a lot of it changed right before they came out, and I can't remember, and I apologize for that. And And so we have that kind of, so now in the DSM-V, it's substance use disorders. These are some of the 11 that they do have to go on. They have to have 3 out of the 11 required. These are not all of them. You'll find them online. Like I said, I apologize. I didn't even think to put DSM-V on there. Another thing for the DSM-V is they did put in addictive disorders separate from substance use disorders, and so that's gambling would be the one that they really put in there. And as well as internet gaming, I believe, is in there. It's actually in Section 3, so it's not technically a DSM-V code, but it's in a section in there. And usually when something's in a section, it just means they need more research on it or encourage people to explore that a little bit more. But that is one that's coming up in addictions also. And they did put caffeine use disorder, caffeine withdrawal. They also put cannabis withdrawal in the DSM-V because there is withdrawal symptoms that folks do have. It's not always common, but you will see them. So that's a newer one in that. So I'm going to shift it over to Valerie. She's going to talk a little bit about food addiction, the chemical components behind that, and then we'll go from there.
I'm going to spend a few minutes, hopefully less than 30, talking about the actual kind of honing in on food-specific addiction or dependence. I've gone over this before last year, but it's always good to go over it again, and there is some new information out there. And if you have any questions, maybe we can hope to answer them. I just had a thought about the orthorexia. It's almost a shame that the state of our diet and our food supply does not allow us to eat healthy on a regular basis unless you actively work towards it. And I think that that's a big problem. Whether the healthy food is more expensive or it's not available, you go through the grocery stores and 95% of the grocery store, they're not even foods, they're just toxic chemicals that have kind of rewired and hijacked our brain. So it's a shame that we even have to have that terminology, because if we were in balance, then we would be eating reasonably healthy food in balance, and this wouldn't even be a problem. So I almost apologize for our state of the nation. It's pathetic that we have to talk this way. Yes, sir?
I'm going to Peru in July. When I'm down there, I go off my diabetes medications and all of my other supplements. Mm-hmm. I do not gain weight and I eat more. They don't have a lot of, unless you live in the big city, mm-hmm. They don't have a lot of processed foods, and you get everything from the market fresh.
That's right. You might actually go through a little withdrawal depending on what you were eating here to get to the healthy food, the headaches that you can get. Do not underestimate the withdrawal symptoms when we change our diet, but I hear that all the time. That's wonderful. And bring some good food back. Yes, ma'am?
Yeah, when I studied abroad in England, I lost weight. I wasn't trying to, and I was just even eating out some of their fast foods that just taste different.
Absolutely. There are foods over there, portion size. Well, first of all, there are foods over here that are not allowed over there. There are sweeteners that are not allowed over there. Portion size is different. Marketing is different. The whole concept of eating fresh, wholesome food to fuel our brain and body means something over there. Here, it just means stuffing our faces until we don't feel, and we feel shame. Yes?
Having already owned up to being a paleo person, one of the things that struck me was that I buy grass-fed beef mm-hmm. because I don't want the extra additives that are put into the food. It's really that.
And that's what's sad. We don't have an option, a lot of us.
And, by just changing, and also it's helped me get rid of some physical ailments by changing and eliminating additives or certain things in food and certain types of food. The reality is there's a healthier approach, which I also found living in Italy, and I also found when I traveled abroad, because these things are not in their diet.
Because you are eating in a balanced way, which we'll get to. And unfortunately, it all relates back to whether you want to call it food dependence or food addiction. I don't care. We have a big problem. And it starts in the brain. So let's recognize a little bit about what the brain is. Simple little things. I'm not a scientist. It's 2 to 3 pounds, one of the most important organs of our body. We have, the brain is the command center that kind of stimulates and is responsible for our communication system. every thought, every feeling, everything that you do, every memory, every reaction happens because of neurotransmitters and interactions between chemicals in your brain and your body. People who talk about substance abuse, we call it a brain disease because everything's going on up there. If we start injecting and putting chemicals that are not normal to the human species, what do you think is going to happen to our functioning? What happens? It's going to deteriorate. We have huge issues in substance abuse, food cravings, autoimmune diseases, everything, obesity, which transfers down to autoimmune diseases, autism, on and on and on. So we have a big problem with what we are putting in our bodies. The interesting thing about our brain, though, is that we are hardwired for survival. So we know we have to eat because food is our energy source, and not just our energy source, but it also becomes who we are, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the blood, the hormones, everything, and we have to reproduce. So our brain is going to make sure that we have little babies and that we have lots of food to eat. Not the food that's prevalent in our society today, but something else called healthy food. Our brain is also wired to have a continuation to want to do these behaviors that we want to survive with. We want to survive, so we need to be eating, and we want to make sure there's something in place that tells us we're going to eat again and again. And our brain remembers, oh, that was good, and that's poison. So we won't do that again, but we'll do that. On and on and on with our food supply. So our higher power has given us two systems, a reward system, a hedonic, pleasurable reward system. They've also given us, we also have just a biological section that kind of works hand in hand together. With our reward system, we have a neurotransmitter, dopamine, that is released when something pleasurable, when something is telling us this is good, we need to do this again, dopamine is released from the reward system. And when everything is in balance, dopamine is released, and we start feeling good, we remember it, and we move on, go on our day, and remember that at certain times we need to do this again, whatever it is. In normal times, usually food, reproduction, and a few other things going on. So, too many things here. Sorry. So just to let you know, I have tons of slides. I'm going to have to go a little faster, but you know, the brain and the reward system is very complex. Tons of research is going on now to see how all the parts of the brain interact, how they interact with the gut, the chemicals that are being released, and there's controversy. We're learning new chemicals that are coming out, but the part that I want to talk about is how food is involved in all of this. We know that palatable food is going to trigger us, help us to want to have more and more. And I wrote down some definitions. Next time I'll put a slide in of what palatable foods are, and tell me what comes to mind when you hear these. Palatable foods are potent chemicals to stimulate our dopamine reward system. They have the capacity to stimulate the appetite and prompt us to eat more. It involves the act of motivation to want this food. These palatable foods have to trigger that. Sensory properties come to play where we have creamy, I wrote down cold, creamy milkshakes, aroma of chocolate chip cookies cooking. Does that drive you crazy, some of you? I mean, I have to sit back there all day sometimes and smell the desserts and the foods and the fried chicken and everything. It's been very interesting for me. The texture, even the texture of foods, of crispy chicken wings, sweetened with a honey mustard sauce, dipping sauce, and then all of these stimulate our appetite. And usually it's combinations of salty, sugary, fat, combinations of foods that kind of align together to really make sure that we come back for more. If 2 chicken nuggets were good, then next time we get the 4-pack and then the 8-pack. And have you noticed they have 20-pack now? It's amazing. where the 2-pack or 3 would be fine before. Research has shown that the higher the sugar concentration, the greater the release of dopamine. That's also with fat as well and the combination foods. So the more palatable they are, the more our reward system gets dinged, gets excited, which could be a problem. The greater the release of dopamine over a period of time, we begin to experience, unfortunately, decreased dopamine receptors. The reason that happens is because our body, the biological side and the reward side, our bodies are trying to stay in balance. So if you're getting too much dopamine, you're getting too excited about something, your body is desperately trying to reel you back in and to get you to whatever normal is, I don't know, but to some sort of sense of normalcy so you're not out of control. The problem is, though, is that when you have decreased receptors, your body doesn't like that. So your body says, okay, I'm going to need a little bit more of these neurotransmitters, the dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, acetylcholine, whatever, to feel not just good, but how about just feeling normal? It's just so sad when you have no feelings of joy in life, and it may be related to what your diet is. What are you eating? What are you drinking? When are you eating? What is your meal pattern? And this is, if you all get excited about this, then you'll be able to transfer this to your patients as well. So we want to feel, we just don't want to feel normal. We want to feel happier and better. So if this much was good, and we have decreased dopamine receptors, then we need more and more and more to not just feel good, but also to feel better. So we have a problem with that. An addiction is born, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Okay? So that's what palatable foods can do for you. They can destroy your life when they're hyperpalatable. Not only is there a problem with our food source that is causing our receptors to get decreased, but we also have genetic areas, too, that research is looking into. Dr. Ernest Noble has actually found a dopamine receptor, D2A1. This is not my area, but I thought it was important for you to know, which is considered a pleasure gene related to addiction. So we have genetic predispositions. How many patients that you have that are addicted to alcohol and drugs, have family members? It's like, to me, 99%. Every chart that I read here, there's a genetic predisposition, unfortunately. Do not think that food and other substance substitution is not right behind there if you give up your drugs and alcohol. Remember, we're hardwired to feel good, and to take care of ourselves the best way that our brain understands at the time. So, a deficit of these particular dopamine receptors would cause subjects to be pleasure, reward deficient, and guess what? People are very susceptible with this gene deficiency to wanting, to needing, to desiring carbohydrate cravings and compulsive overeating. That doesn't mean you have to be that way. I always tell people, just because you have a genetic predisposition, you do not have to be that way. There are ways to go around it. And understanding and knowledge is the start. And good counselors like Cara and you all out there help too. Let me see. I talked about that. Just be aware that there are many things that can trigger the brain. We have hyperpalatable foods that we'll talk about in 5 minutes. Advertising. We can spend hours. There are books and books on advertising and the studies that go behind the right colors, the right shapes, the right people, the right music, the right intensity of everything. Meal patterns, particularly intermittent eating, meaning restricting and then your body having secretions of chemicals that force you to want to eat will happen. And if you're the type of person who does relatively healthy, restrictive eating, I guess, during the day, or for a few days, and all of a sudden the you-know-what hits the fan, and you start binge eating like crazy, that type of meal pattern is very detrimental to your psyche and to your neurotransmitters. You're going to have a higher rate of this binge eating disorder or binge eating practice. So meal patterns of eating is very important, and you have to work with your patients on identifying what they're eating and how they're eating it. The smell of food can actually bring on cravings, sight of food, and stress. When people want to decrease their stress, then we have problems with food. We start eating more and more to mood alter.
Just a little tidbit about advertising. I just actually talked to someone about this the other day. That we were talking about the commercials for Hardee's.
Yes.
They call that food porn.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And
I love that.
They were actually going to go bankrupt, Hardee's, and they started this advertising, for food porn. And now they're like way over, like it like raised their production like 80%. I can't stand those commercials, but at the end of the day, the advertising, how strong that is to like take a company out of like bankruptcy.
Yes.
From commercials.
And that's what every food company is doing. The food companies, again, there are scientists out there, all types of foodie scientists that want to find out not only just the what we'll call the bliss point for food, which we'll get to, but also the perfect environment for you to want to eat a certain food. It's all about the food companies. Yes?
Do you speak at all about sleep deprivation and the impact on brain activation?
No, I cannot. I don't know. I mean, all that I know is that with sleep deprivation, you have increased appetite and weight, but I don't know what's happening with the neurotransmitters. But if you're interested, I guess I better look into it for the next time. Anyone know? Yes?
Yes, well, it's all about trying to get back into balance. And when you're tired, you crave carbohydrates because it gives you a little bit of energy. So as you were talking about homeostasis, this is what really everything is about.
Getting back into balance again. Yeah. And we're also out of balance. Thank you.
It's also a complement of cortisol. Because
with the added stress?
With the added stress, your body's not getting enough sleep. Mm-hmm. The body is stressing to keep active, and as a result, cortisol levels are increased.
And that causes weight gain. Thank you very much. All right. An interesting study, one of thousands of studies that we could have talked about. There was a group of rats, 3 different groups. One was fed a reasonably rat-healthy diet, whatever that is, rat chow. And then there was and then the second group had a limited amount of junk food in their diet, alternating with healthy. And then there was the unlimited amounts of junk food. Well, what happened was Johnson and Kenny discovered that the rats on junk food diets needed more and more and more of the junk food to stimulate their reward system, which is no different than what we do with our diet, our junk food and fast food. We need more and more and more. The healthy diet stayed the same. I believe that the junk food, alternating with healthy food, had a little bit of a problem, but the 100% junk food diet, which is what a lot of us eat, Hardee's breakfast, Chick-fil-A lunch, and then dinner is maybe a pizza or something from Papa John's because we don't have time to make food. We got the kids. They're going swimming. They're doing their activities. We're going to graduate school. We have clients, whatever. So we are eating a junk food diet. Our body doesn't even recognize half of this food. And you wonder why we have autoimmune diseases and we're breaking out and changing. We're becoming almost deformed with how we look, and it's awful what's happening. So eating in general, eating is very, very complex. That's a whole other talk. It's multifactorial, and there are many things coming at us to determine what we eat. The stress level, the foods that we're eating, genetic predisposition, how is our GI tract working. Basically, there are 2 systems that we just talked about to stay in balance, homeostasis, the physiologic and that reward system, that hedonic reward system. And they're working in concert with each other to try to maintain some sort of balance, which obviously is not working very well in our society. Just be aware that there's a lot of nerves and hormones, bacteria, probiotics and bacteria that we're learning that help with appetite or interact with appetite. And those hormones and other chemicals that come from the GI tract are communicating up and down with our brain for what to eat, when to eat, and how to eat. We actually have, this is so strange to me, but we've just found not just taste buds on our tongue, but there are taste-like cells throughout our GI tract, in our pancreas, and in our liver, and the brain. So there is so much that we really don't know, but as we find out little things, we'll try to share them with you. So we find that fascinating. And then the GI chemicals, the ghrelin, the leptin, whatever, is actually communicating with the brain neurotransmitters, going back and forth on how to eat. It's very, very intricate. Okay, so with the normal appetite, the physiologic response, we have chemicals coming in, and it tells us what to eat. Basically, it's time to eat, it's time not to eat. The longer you go without eating, chemicals like ghrelin and neuropeptide Y might start stimulating you. So you think you're doing good going all day without eating, and then all of a sudden it's 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock at night, and you taste something, and you've gone to the races. You're binge eating now. And then, of course, you overate, you don't feel good, so you don't want to eat breakfast, and there goes your whole balance out of whack again. We need to get back into a normal state of eating. With that physiologic state that's telling us based on blood sugar and nutrients in our body temperature, our activity level, we've got that hedonic dopamine reward system kind of working with us. And it tells us what food tastes good, how much we need of it. It encourages us to eat. We have something called an attentional bias, which tells us that if this is good, we need to go back and get that again. We need to seek it. We need to purchase it. We need to take care of it. It has value to us. We will take care of what we value. And we value candy bars and cookies and fast food, so we're going to get more and more of that because our body says it's good. What do you think happens when, well, let me just go over that. We also have other chemicals that are being released, bliss chemicals, that further help us to want more food. The problem is that scientists thought that the biologic system always was in control, so that we'd be in balance. But with the onset of our new food, that's not true. Our hedonic pleasure reward center oftentimes is now overriding our basic needs, which is a big problem because now we have our drive going for what we want, what feels good, hyperstimulation, and normalcy goes out the window. And we are so frustrated, we are so tired, we don't feel good about what we're doing, yet we want more and more and more. Sound like anything? An addiction, a dependence, whatever word you want. So, we've raised the amount of dopamine needed to experience the pleasure. We now have a habit of going more and more into that same area. And for us, what we're talking about is food. It's not drugs, it's not alcohol, but is food not a drug on some level? What's the difference? If you closed your eyes and you were giving something in your mouth, whether it was a drug or food, after a few months, you wouldn't even know which is which if you really didn't taste it. You wouldn't be able to know. You'd have the same feelings, the same cravings, the same desire. Unfortunately, you would have the same feelings of substance abuse. Cravings, binging, withdrawal symptoms, which are painful. Some people will not give up caffeine or sugar because of those horrible migraines. What about artificial sweetener? How many of you get migraines from artificial sweetener, don't even realize it, and if you try to give it up, you feel awful? So now we start having a fear of not wanting to feel bad, so we need our fix, not a drink in the morning, but we need that Pepsi or coffee and Danish or whatever you do. And then the process begins and continues. So what are these foods? They're unnatural. Some of them the body doesn't even recognize. They've taken innocent food like an apple and made it into apple pie or apple syrup to put on your white refined pancakes. They've taken a nice sweet potato, beautiful fiber and nutrients, and in its normal level, if you were eating well, would taste sweet. But you don't even recognize that because now you're onto sweet potato fries dipped in some sort of tangy sauce, and then you're drinking your diet soda. So highly processed foods are a big problem. We have totally taken normal, beautiful food meant to nourish and nurture human beings, and we have just totally destroyed them and made them into these creations that are very detrimental to our bodies. It's pathetic what has happened. I'm not a scientist. I'm very, can you tell by the way I talk? It's just too feely, but it's very sad what has happened to us. Foods high in sugar are will cause excessive brain reward. salty snacks, combinations. I mean, anything that raises dopamine, which will be highly palatable foods, refined flours, caffeine, foods that we consider to be very irresistible, that call us and say we want and need more. Very seductive foods, very seductive. Soft drinks. Cara was talking about her patient, that was drinking 3 liters of diet or regular? Diet, which really doesn't matter as far as I'm concerned, because the diet soda is hundreds of times sweeter than regular soda. So you actually develop a tolerance and a need for that intense sweetener. I always tell the same story. I have patients over there who want 10 to 12 packets of artificial sweetener in their cups of iced tea, and they might drink 8 of those teas a day. Their tongue and brain don't even register a packet of regular sugar. So maybe if you all have escalated in your amounts of artificial sweetener, then perhaps a goal for you or your clients is, well, let's just go down and then try a packet of sugar and see if something normal registers for you. So soft drinks are a problem. They are highly addictive. Even the bubbles, even drinking out of a cup, donuts, French fries with cheese and bacon on top we have it here, so that's how I know. And the patients love it sometimes. Anyway, please be aware that the food cues that the food companies have done, the magic marketing, is out there and running wild and extremely successful. We see it. We have like euphoric recall. We even think about lunch. I can't wait to go to that restaurant to order that food. And then you're salivating. And this much might have been good a few months ago, but now you want a little bit more. And when you go to all-you-can-eat bars, if you're cue sensitive, forget it. You're eating and eating and overeating tremendous amounts of food and not necessarily feeling good about yourself. Okay, 2 more minutes, I guess. Be aware that food companies are, in my opinion, initially responsible for what's going on. Our society is based on making money. I had a debate with someone in my class on Tuesday over there about morally, anyway, long story, but food companies need to make money. So they need to make sure that you buy their product. So they have scientists that are looking into how to give you the best hit to excite you to want more. That's all. Yeah.
One of the things that I had actually learned in one of the conferences I was at is that the scientists really do take that bliss point and all the different chemicals.
Yes.
And things like a bag of Doritos. Have you ever sat down during football season and someone can eat an entire bag of
Fritos.
Doritos,
Well, yeah.
and then they're like, oh, I'm still hungry. Where are the wings, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, what they actually are putting in these foods are chemicals that shut down our body's natural ability to recognize when we're full. So our satiety signals are completely being overridden by the chemicals that they use. So people eat meat, and they legitimately don't feel hungry until they're so uncomfortably full. The physical sensations are able to override that and say, hey, you're going to get sick. You're about to, you can't handle anymore. But the chemicals that are going into a lot of these foods really are designed for us to not even recognize what our body is naturally sending out, and it's really messing with a lot of the different chemicals that naturally pop up for us. So that's also something to kind of pay attention to in terms of food choices and recognizing in your clients, are they turning to certain foods that are problematic for them, because that's what really is going on with it. Go ahead.
No, excellent. They have scientists. I'll be right there. They have scientists, and their sole job is to test different combinations of foods. And that will give us that, what she calls that bliss point, that point that it's not too salty, too sweet, because if it's too much, it's like they call the bliss point goes in a upside down U shape. You can get up to this point of combinations of chemicals and sweetness and sour and bitter and everything. But if you go just a little bit higher, then people don't want to eat it. So they have to find that exact bliss point that gets you hooked. We have large portions of food that people with visual cues seem to want. There's layering of foods. So just remember that chemical dependency means drugs of abuse and alcohol, and chemicals hijack our brain. They come from natural plant sources that were never meant to be abused this way. You take Cocoa leaves, you get cocaine. Distilled grains from fruits, potatoes, from fruits and potatoes. Regular tobacco leaves have been hyper-concentrated to become nicotine. Our brains are not meant to take natural food and hyper-concentrate it and then put layers and layers of other sweets and fat and salt around it. So our brains are being hijacked. Be aware of that. It's not an innocent behavior at all. How many of you find that dried fruit might be a little bit more desirable to you than a plum versus raisins or prunes? I can eat maybe a few prunes today, but then by next week, not prunes so much, that's a problem all by itself, but let's say dates or something, and I'm eating the whole bag, or the dried cranberries, because it's hyper-concentrated, and a lot of them put sugar on top. Yes?
I dehydrate a lot of my fruits and vegetables, and just simply nothing on them. By the process of dehydrating, it increases the sweetness.
Of course, yes. Yes, and that's what I'm saying. It's that hyper-concentration. So if you're triggered by sweets, even think about dried fruits. And dried fruits, why do you think they put them in this trail mix? You get the sweet, you get the salty, you get the crunchy. Man, people can eat bags of this healthy trail mix food. And all of these bars that are out there now, they're glorified cookies with chemicals in it. They're not protein bars. It's amazing what's going on. All right, so just be aware that we didn't even talk about obesity. That's a whole other, we talked about that last year, but with the prevalence of obesity, everyone thinks that those people have a real problem of overeating. It happens to all of us. Normal weight, large, small, it doesn't matter. People have mechanisms that they can try to hide their overeating, whether it's good or not, drugs, smoking, purging, restrictive diets, excessive exercise. But this problem is available to anybody and happens to anybody. And I think that, and this is just to let you know that there are some videos that we're not going to show. We don't have time today, but you have them on your slide presentation. Make sure you look at them. There are so many out there, about the effects of overeating. All right, I think we're going to take a 10-minute break, and then Cara's going to compare the two. Thank you.
All right, welcome back. Welcome back. So one of the things that Val really talks a lot about in her fabulous slides is the idea of kind of the food addiction piece. Is it real? Is it something that is chemical? Is it behavioral? Is it biological? And it is one of the hottest topics right now in the eating disorder community because there's really two different beliefs. And one is that it's an eating disorder, and one is that there's food addiction. And a lot of them don't believe, like half of them, I would say, the two sides, don't believe in food addiction. And so some of the lead researchers really feel that food addiction is more specific to one type of food, one specific thing that you eat that you develop that addiction to. And others feel that food addiction is similar to eating addiction and that it's just about food in general. So it's a lot of hot topics. And of course, when someone talks and presents on it, they all have the facts that support their opinion, and then someone else got facts that support the other side of it. And so it's really hard to kind of figure out what you believe and where you fall. And I think at this point in time where we are in research, I don't think there's truly a right or wrong answer within that, as long as you do the research and find out what you believe, where you fall within that. I still struggle with that. I think at one point I was like, absolutely, food addiction, without a doubt. And then there are other times where I'm like, oh, well, that research makes sense too. Maybe it's not about that. Maybe it's about this. And so there's a lot going on right now, and it's still something that is being researched a lot. Dr. Gold and the University of Florida is doing a lot of really great stuff with it. Other researchers who talk about it, Kathy Rito, Ralph Carson, a lot of those folks, this is a topic that comes up quite a bit. So here's some just articles about it. A book, one that's really good, is called Food Junkie. It's by Vera Terman. She talks a lot about the idea of food addiction in her book. I also like the book Craving by Dr. Manojwala. I don't know if you guys have read that. That's not food addiction specific, but it just talks about the chemicals and our brain's response to cravings. But I really like these. I got 3 articles. Unfortunately, I'm sorry, I added these slides in. I was like, I really want to talk about it. So you don't have it. We are going to put the updated PowerPoint on the website, so you will be able to take a look at this. I apologize. I was just really excited and wanted to include it. So the one here is food addiction real? If food addiction is real, how do we treat eating disorders? And so what Nancy really says is that there's a real difference in beliefs between food addiction and eating disorders. She said a lot of it is based on weight stabilization versus weight loss. And so in her kind of reporting and in her article, she talks about weight stabilization rather than weight loss is an important distinction. Scientists acknowledge that some binge eaters are not going to be able to lose weight and be in a normal range once a large number of fat cells are in place, and they're going to want to stay or return there. This leads to the phenomenon of the body feeling it's being starved and compensating by holding on to fat. In contrast, the food addiction communities tends to celebrate weight loss and make it the goal. So kind of her theory is, well, depending on what you believe in, a lot of times dictates some of that recovery goals that you set with your clients. Are we really talking about weight loss, or are we talking about weight stabilization? Why do you think that's important to identify? Totally different goals.
I mean, I would literally, it's really important to find these clients. Like, I've got some very obese people who are about, I want to change my behavior, I want to change this, I want to lose weight. And I've got other patients who are, you know, sometimes I wonder if they have a body dysmorphia issue, but really for them, if they could be accepting of where they are and just eating more normally, that's a different goal.
Absolutely. One is about acceptance, and one is about kind of a change in a weight loss. Weight stabilization also comes back to the idea that we talked about with balance and homeostasis. Weight stabilization is really about finding where your body normally wants to function at. Weight loss is about, obviously, a number going down on a scale. Weight loss, confusing that for your clients. If you've got someone who you're not sure if it's food addiction or if it's an eating disorder, and we make the decision, okay, let's focus on weight loss. Boy, if they have that eating disorder side to them and they focus on that number, we've got a whole new obsession going on.
The other piece to that is if it's weight loss, like the morbidly obese, I'm going to work on a more holistic approach.
Absolutely.
I'm going to look at exercise.
It's not just about a number. It's about everything else.
Whereas it's weight stabilization, I want to know what they're trying to get a little different. So it really makes a huge difference.
It does. It's a huge, huge difference.
I'm wondering if an overall umbrella of this is anxiety disorders, you know, and looking at some of the underlying anxieties that are feeding these behaviors.
I think that you are fairly spot on within that. I don't know, just like Valerie was talking about, and where we are in the U.S., do we even know what dieting is, a healthy diet? We hear the word dieting and we automatically think someone's trying to lose weight, but the reality is your diet is just what you eat on a daily basis. We've turned it into a meaning of a specific way of eating or trying to kind of have a goal or something.
When I was working with meth addicts a while ago, many of them, when they got off of their stimulant, then we encouraged damage control, and they would become hooked on sugar. And when it doesn't become, well, they got the sugar or they got the meth, and I was wondering your treatment and to use medication. And when can we just say this is going to be as good as it gets?
Well, it's an interesting piece because if you take a look at the Big Book and some of the original parts of it, it really talks about when you're having an alcohol craving to have sugar. Did you guys ever know that? That's in the Big Book. And so it's so funny because I think obviously when they wrote it, they had no idea about how sugar works in the body and the brain. But it is kind of that idea. It's a very normalized piece to say, oh, if you're going to drop the drugs and alcohol, try a Jolly Rancher. Try something like this when you're having that craving. I mean, when I was working here, people would have pocketfuls of Jolly Ranchers, and they'd be just passing them out like you wouldn't believe. And they would just have to have something all the time, whether it's an oral fixation or whether it's the sugar. But it is a part where it offers a lot of psychological comfort as well as physiological comfort. And so where is the line? What does that look like? And that's a line that I think is different for everybody because we have to find out how we cross that line where it's now that obsessive-compulsive side of it, or is it something that's manageable and doesn't feel like it's out of control? So I guess, and identifying for each client what's manageable, what works for you. Someone eating 3 Kit Kats, 3 packages of Kit Kats, 2 Twixes, and a bunch of peanut butter cups every day, that's not a manageable use of sugar. That's something that's kind of probably crossing that threshold of being unhealthy for them. But if they're having, my husband calls it me an old lady, I keep those little cinnamon discs in my purse, an old lady candy, and I'll have those because I like it. They taste good. I don't eat all of them all the time. I just have one every now and then. That's a manageable use of sugar. Even if I'm kind of like, oh, I don't really feel good, I need to pick me up, okay, I could probably use a different coping skill, but it's not that I'm always turning to the sugar to make it better. So it's hard to find that.
I just have one more question because I'm not
And then I'll come to
doing
you.
treatment now. You know, the damage control, and you answered that well, that as long as it doesn't get compulsive. A lot of people that are into these, you know, unbalanced behaviors have also been smokers, and I know that over the past 15 years, stop smoking. Has that been accepted now that it could be like managed, maybe 6 cigarettes a day to help them control?
I don't know as much about nicotine. Yeah.
It's a mood stabilizer.
It is a mood stabilizer, and we've got all those stuff now, with, vaping, and we're seeing a decreased use of cigarettes in teens, but we're also seeing an increased vaping use. I honestly believe, and this is my personal belief, that there's really no safe amount of nicotine that you can use. That's my belief, though. I can't force that on everybody else. So I guess it's hard to find out. It's that balance,
Right here, but when they start drinking, the intensity of the alcohol makes it really hard. Mm-hmm. Sometimes similar might be happening with food.
Absolutely.
But same thing with nicotine. It's like you may only eat 6, but that intensity is so strong. And like with alcohol, you can go down below where you were. You come back in at the same level. So I think that it's just depends on the individual.
Right, I'm talking damage control.
Yeah. And it's all mood altering, and it's important to pay attention to that. Keep you sweat. I'm going to talk to her, and then I'll come to you, I promise.
What I was going to say is the problem that we're really running into is the media today.
Oh,
the media portrays everybody as needing to lose weight or do something different.
You're not good enough.
That's it. Mm-hmm. And so that they reflect it on themselves individually and get into all the stuff which makes things worse versus making it better.
Absolutely. There is such an impact on media in terms of body dysmorphia, anorexia, bulimia. We are seeing an increase, statistics are showing an increased rate of eating disorders among men. Part of it is were we asking the right questions to diagnose them properly? And the other side of it is in the past 20 years, advertising has changed significantly. We're not just sexualizing women, we are absolutely sexualizing the males. There's a Got Milk ad. It's one of my favorite ones, I'm not going to lie. It's got, was it Ronaldo, the super hot soccer player? But he's literally obviously naked, because that's, I don't know why, but they put him naked, but covered in Greek yogurt. And it was just a Got Milk, are you getting enough protein for today? And I was like, all right. I mean, I didn't get Greek yogurt out of that, but sure. So we're sexualizing a lot of the things that we do. It's just like that food porn. It's exactly what that is. That is food porn. And so media and advertising and all of these fad diets, the 21-day fix, the Shakeology shakes, the ideal protein, even juicing, even things like Weight Watchers, while it does push towards a more balanced, healthier lifestyle, there is still just that idea of a dieting. And it actually, if you've ever been to a Weight Watchers meeting, I've been to many, many in my life, they're a lot like 12-step meetings. And it's hilarious, because I remember going to my first one, like, hey, this sounds all familiar to me. Okay, I can do this. So Weight Watchers is a much healthier version of them, but it's still kind of that still fad. There's a lot of commercials for it. Did you guys see that Weight Watchers commercial? It was one of my favorite ones that came out this past year. But it was, if you're happy and you know it, clap your hands. Oh, no, I'm sorry. If you're happy and you know it, eat a meal. If you're sad and you know it, eat a snack. So they turned that song into kind of whatever emotion you're feeling, eat a snack. And it talks a lot about that psychological fix of food. Who had their hand up over here?
Oh, I did. Yeah, and you know what? I was going to just bounce off of her on the media is that, I feel like, I don't know if it's related, but I feel like, different ethnic groups have different weight requirements.
Absolutely.
And I don't think that we do that in America. I think that we go off of a standard BMI. I can't stand that word.
BMI.
Thank you. And I just think that, if you have a little bit more booty, I'm just saying, you have a little bit of heavier chest, hey, it is what it is. Guess what? I'm going to weigh a little bit more than you. That's going to tip me over the BMI. So guess what? I'm considered obese. Mm-hmm. No, I'm not obese. Like, what is real healthy? And I think it has to be on an individual basis.
Absolutely.
What is healthy for you? Do you have high blood pressure? pressure? You know, are your knees hurting because of your weight? You know what I mean? Like, just stuff like that. I've seen people be really thin and really sickly. And people be really, which I would consider heavy, healthy, could run miles around me. You know what I mean? So I just think that it's also that standard as well.
And that's one of the questions I really work on with my clients, whether they're substance abuse or whether they're eating disorders. What is your version of healthy? What is healthy to you? And be honest with me. I don't care what you have on there. I just want to know what you see as healthy. And I have some that are just, well, healthy means I have to be at this number or lower. I have to be this size or lower. Or healthy is I have less anxiety during the day, or I'm able to sleep better. So it's about kind of challenging what their perceptions of healthy is and making it much more holistic, making it much more appropriate for their body type. And that's a big part of eating disorder recovery too, is accepting your body for where it's at. It's kind of similar to that weight stabilization of, well, you know what? If I stay in my head that I want to be the next best Victoria's Secret model and I'm going to be strutting the runway with all these other women, well, guess what? They're 5'10" and about 100 and how many pounds, right? I'm 5'2". So just in a very basic way of looking at my body's limitations, am I going to grow 10 inches in the rest of my life? No, because I'm already shrinking. So I'm not going to get any taller. And I'm a stocky build. I have muscle. I have chest area. If I have this unrealistic expectation that I'm holding on to, I'm already setting myself up for failure. We have to challenge a lot of these perceptions of what is healthy, what is real, what is achievable within your body.
Marketing is, some companies are beginning to know that. Some laws have changed where in Europe they will no longer allow.
Israel, too? Yeah.
Israel, they will not allow the super skinny models. They just passed some laws yesterday. And also companies like Dove, what's a real woman.
Yes, I love that one.
There's a huge advertisement that...
I think Lane Bryant, I'm no angel.
Well, not Lane Bryant, but it was the swimsuit, what's the one that... Sports Illustrated. Larger women. Okay, there's a website called Swimsuits for All that caters to...
Yep.
You know, and it's not, instead of
mannequins that are better.
The only way you can look good in a bathing suit is if you're this wide. This is what looking good in a bathing suit looks like for an average person. So there is somewhat of a consciousness shift.
Yeah. There's movement. Unfortunately, a lot of that movement is happening outside of the U.S. Similar to kind of the food additives and food things that we have in our foods here, but they don't have in other places. A lot of that, unfortunately, is a lot of laws, a lot of legislation. There's a lot of pieces. I mean, you've got Israel, you've got France, you've got Italy, who just banned models that are under a BMI of 18. Again, BMI I'm not really stuck to because I don't think BMI incorporates everything about a person. It's just about height and weight. But that's a step in the right direction. Photoshopping is now banned in certain parts of the world, or at least extreme photoshopping is banned in parts of the world. Ideals of beauty is different in all sorts of different places, so that also impacts it too.
It's illegal for fashion designers to put anybody who is an unhealthy BMI on their runway. They get
and the designers are revolting against that because they say
$10,000
fine,
and up to they could actually go to jail.
Wow, I didn't know that. I knew it was a huge fine. But the problem is that they're fighting against it. They're fighting against it because, well, we create our clothes to fit our models on the runway. The runway is supposed to be more artistic. And so there is backlash, but the places are standing firm, which is really, really cool. That is actually a whole nother talk. Maybe I'll put one together of advertising because we could go on and on and on. But these are some really good articles about binge eating versus food addiction, eating addiction versus food addiction, the terminologies that we use. So it's a very up-and-coming, well, not up-and-coming, it's been going on for a while, but it's still a very hot topic. Really good research on there. I encourage you guys to look at and see what you believe in. See what kind of fits for you. Okay, so if we break these down into the disease model of perception, the disease concept applied to substance abuse, we know it's primary progressive chronic disease, right? It is primary. We do have to treat it first. There will be co-occurring stuff, but it is one. I mean, we can't really treat depression and anxiety if someone's drinking a fifth of liquor a day, right? It's progressive. If we don't stop it, it will continue to get worse. It's family disease, genetics that Valerie was talking about. There's also a lot of epigenetics that we know about how epigenetics transfers from generation to generation. Complex etiology, it's a biopsychosocial spiritual disease. And I really like that that's being incorporated now that we're taking it outside of biological, psychological, social, and adding in that spiritual concept, keeping in mind spirituality and religion are different. They can be the same, but for a lot of folks it's important for them to recognize that. Relapsing is common. Some effects of the disease are irreversible. We've got wet brain. We know a lot of times people sometimes just don't cognitively clear. Potentially fatal. And full and sustained recovery is real and possible for both the patient and the family. Sometimes the recovery is sustainable more for the family because they get it a little bit quicker, or sometimes it's for the patient and the family is slower to get on it, but it is possible for both and individually. Well, if we look at the disease concept applied to eating disorders, it also is a primary progressive chronic disease. Now, this is where it gets controversial. A lot of researchers out there, it's still kind of almost like a split in the field again, where they don't believe that it's chronic. They believe that you can heal from it and never have any eating disorder symptoms for the rest of your life. I struggle with that because I believe that when we implement healthy coping skills, if we forget why we're doing them, it's so easy to backslide. So there is a sense of keeping in mind of why we're doing things. It's one of the reasons that they have the 12-step meetings. I had people all the time say, Cara, I really hate going to the meetings. They're just like these sob stories, and they're horrific and horrible, and it brings my mood down. Well, I said, well, if you went everywhere and everything was happy, joyous, and free all the time, we are pleasure-seeking animals. We're pain avoidant. We're going to forget the bad. And so it's important to remember why we're doing things. And so even I personally believe in working with eating disorders, it's important to go back to why can't we go back there again? What wasn't working for you? It has to be a conversation that comes up. That's my belief. There's others that say, no, they can do it. They can get on a healthy pattern, and they probably won't ever have to talk about it again, other than if they're sharing their story with someone saying, hey, I used to have an eating disorder. This is what I did. I'm doing a lot better now. There's two different beliefs in that. Family disease. How is an eating disorder a family disease versus, or what might be a difference between that and substance abuse being a family disease? Well, I guess that we're similar.
What's the question again?
Here, I'll rephrase it because this is a better question. How is an eating disorder a family disease? How about that?
It's patterns in the family. It's also genetic predisposition.
So patterns in the family. Talk to me about that. What is a pattern in the family that can lead to an eating disorder? How they cope, your diet. What's prepared on a daily basis. What's not prepared on a daily basis. Celebrations. Family. We know that, if we take a look at traditions, like big, a happy Italian family on Sundays, you've got probably like bowls and bowls and bowls of food that just get passed around. We are building the emotional attachment to that at this point.
If you look at the disease concept, it's saying a disease is something that makes you at ease. Mm-hmm. And if you have a family member that has an eating disorder or chemical imbalance of some kind, it makes the rest of the family ill at ease. Yes. So that's a disease for the whole family.
Absolutely. And that's exactly it. I kind of misphrased my question the first time around. I was more looking for how is eating disorder a family disease. It's absolutely, if one person's impacted by it, it has affected the whole family. If mom's a chronic dieter, then guess what? At one point in time, you're probably following hers just for the fact that she was cooking a meal and they didn't want to cook another 3 meals for all the different kids, right? If someone was a chronic exerciser, or and I use this example all the time. My dad worked out all the time. He ran marathons when I was a kid. He was always trying to be healthy. He was in and out of Weight Watchers before I was in and out of Weight Watchers. And then he would make comments of, well, why don't you go running? Maybe you should go to the gym with me. The gym is a healthier place to be. And it started kind of spinning these wheels, and I started to develop a lot of his values. Well, a lot of his values weren't really healthy. And I had to find that out on my own and realize, oh boy, I really can't be doing that. That's not working for me. And it's still not working for him in some ways. And I talk to him all the time about it, but that's his stuff. I can't change that. But it's those patterns of behavior and values that we learn. That's how a lot of the family disease happens too within eating disorders. It's dependent on what you see in family members in terms of exercise, diet, their patterns of eating. Similar to addiction, though, is if you had a sibling who's drinking and smoking all the time, that kind of either becomes norm to you, you either really dislike it, maybe you give it a try. So that's how it's very similar in that sense. There is withdrawal symptoms a lot of times. People don't realize that depending on the kind of foods that you're eating and what you might stop or restrict. If someone is an anorexic, you're probably not going to see those withdrawal symptoms because they don't really have anything that they're withdrawing from. Same complex etiology. Relapsing is very common. Relapsing occurs in a lot of different ways, whether it's a binge here, a binge there, missing a meal there, all of that kind of, it's the same thing of, oh, I didn't go to a meeting, oh, it's okay, I'll call my sponsor tomorrow. Those are small pieces of relapse that can add up to the actual chemical relapse. Now this one, in terms of potentially fatal, is a lot more, in terms of research and what we know, is that it's got a significant morbidity and mortality rate. Anorexia has a mortality rate of 5%, with 50% of the deaths occurring by suicide, which is an interesting concept when you think about anorexia, because a lot of times it already is a form of suicide. When you've got someone who's down to 80 pounds, they're on the couch. I mean, I heard a horror story of someone who's down to 56 pounds. She was skin and bones. She was having heart palpitations. She couldn't breathe. She was in and out of treatment. She called the treatment center and said, you know, I know my time's coming. I'm in so much pain. I'm in so much pain from being where I'm at physically. Can I just come and get my pain managed? I don't want to do treatment, though. She didn't want to get healthy. And in the end, she died. She died, I think, like 6 to 7 months later. And in a way, that inability to eat and knowing that their help was there and that she had access to getting into treatment, there is an aspect of, is that suicide? Is there just kind of suicide by starvation versus an actual suicide attempt of an overdose, gunshot wound, anything like that? So there's something to think about in terms of what our patients are doing. Full and sustained recovery is real and possible also for the eating disordered patient. They absolutely can have a happy, healthy life. This is a really great chart of comorbid symptoms and criteria between substance dependence and binge eating disorder / food addiction. So this is more related to binge eating disorder, but it's just kind of a nice chart for you guys. It should be in the slide, right? Okay, good. You can all see it. I know it's hard to read because it's really small up there. Take a look at that. It goes over the 8 ones of escalation, loss of control, consequences, distress, tolerance, withdrawal, time. And we're going to go over these more specifically, but I like that chart. The National Center on Addiction and Substance Abuse did one of the first comprehensive studies on the link between substance abuse and eating disorders and revealed that 50% of folks who have eating disorders tend to have abuse of alcohol or other drugs, compared to 9% of the general population. That is a significantly high difference. 35% of those who are alcohol or drug users have eating disorders compared to 3% of the population. So you know that there is a co-occurring piece of it. Is it food addiction? Is it behavioral? Is it guilt? Is it shame? There's just that co-occurring, there's that link between there. So Carolyn Ross did this really great article on 8 surprising parallels between food and drug addiction. The first one is the effect on the brain reward system, which is a lot of what Valerie talked about. Catch me up here. Okay. So ASAM continues to broaden their definition of addiction, including process addictions. And now even the DSM has broadened their definition of addictions, right? They added gambling. They're working on adding internet gaming. So they're looking at process addictions. And now sometimes what people consider can actually put food in a process addiction. I think it's more of a chemical dependency just because we ingest it and what it does within the body. But that's my preference. But basically, they all have an impact on the brain. And they flood it with dopamine, causing the increased pleasure, sometimes impacting their self-control. And over time, the brain actually changes. So it goes back to what Valerie was saying. A green pepper is actually very sweet, right? If you slice it and you kind of bite it, it's got a very sweetness to it. If we are so used to highly palatable foods and we've built up a tolerance to it, some folks can eat that and not even tell that it's sweet. They just taste kind of the water-based flavor of a green pepper. And so part of it is that we know that we're building up a tolerance to the different dopamine receptors. And so I don't know if you talked about endogenous opioids. Did you mention that? But foods that are highly palatable, high in fat, sugar, saturated fats, release what we call endogenous opioids. Those are our body's natural opiates. That is that feel-good factor. That's kind of some of what's happening. There's intense cravings. Due to brain changes, compulsive eaters may have cravings for junk foods, the salty, high-calorie, for their next high, right? And we know that not only is it highly palatable foods, but it's layered foods. Valerie kept kind of alluding to that of the French fries with the cheese and the bacon, or the fried chicken with the honey barbecue sauce dipped in Blue Ranch or something. But we layer these foods. I mean, look at why things like nachos are so popular, right? You've got chips, you've got meat, you've got beans, you've got cheese, you've got lettuce, you've got tomato. I don't do the olives, those are gross. Sour cream, guacamole. But you've got the layers. Look at Sweet Frog. Why do you think these yogurt bars have become so popular? What do? Make it the way. So you've got the visual stimulation, you've got the layering, they've got the salty, they've got the sweet from the fruit, they've got chocolate, they've got different flavored ice creams. So not only is it interactive, but we're layering, right? I mean, have any of you guys, maybe you're better than me, if you can walk into Sweet Frog and get one ice cream and 1 or 2 toppings, God bless you. If you're me, you've got 2 different ice cream flavors, you've got 4 different flavors, you've got some whipped cream on top and some sprinkles just because they're pretty, okay? So, I'm just saying. But there's a reason why they are so popular. Then we also can take a look at brain imaging. So if you look at fMRI studies and you put someone who's an addict in the machine and you show them a picture, you show them pictures of flowers and the water and the ocean, and then you show them a picture of their drug of choice, there's that spot that lights up, right? Well, they did the same thing with those who are food addicts, who struggle with food addiction. And they put them in and they showed them the same pictures, and then they showed them pictures of food, and that same part of the brain lit up. So we know that there's something happening within there in the same exact areas. There's tolerance and withdrawal. So we know with chemical dependency, I might have 3 beers one week, I might need a 6-pack the next week, then maybe I'm drinking 2 6-packs by the end of the week, or then at some point, maybe a few months down the road, I'm drinking hard alcohol, and I'm drinking half a bottle, then I'm drinking a bottle, or maybe I start with 1 bottle of wine, and I end up with 3 bottles of wine. Klonopin, 1 milligram to 6 milligrams, whatever the jump is. So we know that we build tolerance. Well, the same thing happens with the foods, right? So it goes back to some of those rat studies. It goes back to a lot of the chemical stuff that Valerie was talking about. And withdrawal. So withdrawal, we definitely see it in drug addiction. We have a detox unit here, tremors, shakes, risk of seizure, creepy crawly, sweats, chills, all that really fun stuff that folks go through, and a lot of stuff that they just want to avoid. But they also have withdrawal symptoms from food, which can cause irritability, agitation, anxiety. Typically, you're going to see a lot of caffeine withdrawal, but you're also going to see some sugar withdrawal where people do get really irritable, they do get really agitated, and have a hard time managing their feelings or their mood. And we see that a lot more with the heavily processed foods with high sugar and fat content. And there is that sense of denial that happens also, right? So I can stop when I want. It's not that bad. It's not that much food anyways. I just like to eat. We're at the buffet now, so when in Rome, right? So we also know that Americans continue to underestimate the amount of calories that they consume. We also, amazingly enough, overestimate the amount of calories that we burn. I always find that funny. And so not only do we underestimate the number of calories we eat, but we also underestimate the amount that we weigh. And what that does, too, is that impacts our psychological component of where we feel we're at, comfortability. And it's funny because it's either that way or a lot of times we feel like we're overweight. We've eaten too much. I'm very uncomfortable in my body. And so it's really hard to kind of feel where we're at and be present in the moment with that. Both require a change in behaviors and routines to see results for substance abuse and eating disorder. We have to change our behaviors. We have to change what we do in order to push past that denial. A lot of times denial goes into the families too, right? It's not that bad. They're just kids. Every teenager drinks, right? It's not that bad. They're in college. They're just going to party. Oh, it's just another fad diet. She'll snap out of it. Oh, this running phase won't last very long. It's not that, she's lost a little bit of weight, but that's healthy, right? So there's a lot of family denial that happens too. Or if the family is just as sick and someone else has the disease, they kind of just buddy up together, right? they also have multiple unsuccessful attempts to quit or cut down, right? We know that both of them have significant tendencies to relapse. One of the things that we know is that 95% of people who lose weight will gain it back. Not only do they gain it back, but they tend to gain back more than where they originally started. So we know diets don't work. It's about changing our perception of that. We can lose weight and maintain it if we change our whole lifestyle. But it's taking a look at that whole lifestyle change. Same with substance abuse. It's not just about putting the drug and alcohol down. It's about what am I doing differently? How do I cope with my feelings? How do I cope with the guilt and shame? What works for me? What doesn't work for me? And we know that, an example is gastric bypass, right? So gastric bypass, it's very interesting because depending on who the patient is, there might actually be food addiction there, right? I was a nursing student way back in the day. I didn't finish. But I did a rotation in the surgery unit, and I sat in, and apparently for my day, we were doing gastric bypass and gastric banding. Well, I was talking to the nurse. She's like, well, this is always crazy to me. I never understand it because I feel like people need more therapy around it. This was before there was really that mandate on it. They had just done a gastric bypass on a lady 2 weeks ago. Made her stomach smaller. She stayed in the hospital. She was starting to lose weight. She left the hospital, went directly to McDonald's, and had a Big Mac. She came in, her stomach had exploded. Yeah. Because it's so tiny, right? And it took a lot of work, a lot of reconstructive. I don't even know what she told me, how her recovery went, but it wasn't good. But she knew, she had the education, she had people telling her what she could and couldn't eat, and yet she still had that compulsion to, as soon as she left that hospital, she had to go to McDonald's. She had to get that food. And so we know that it's not just about these quick fixes, these quick changes. We also know people with gastric bypass, 25% of them will develop an addiction, a chemical dependency, typically alcohol, because they can only have liquids for the first few months. Gastric bypass actually creates physiological changes. You get drunk faster, it doesn't last as long, and it goes through your system. So if you want to maintain that inebriation, you have to keep drinking. Well, then you build up a tolerance to it, and then it can really lead to the alcoholism. So about 25% of people who have gastric bypass do develop that. They also tend to gain weight back at the end. A few years down the road, they're doing studies on that. 4 or 5 years down, there is a significant amount of people that are gaining weight. Relapse happens not only in use of substance, but through behavioral changes as well. So we know that happens for someone who's chemically dependent. Say they're in a 12-step program. Oh, I just missed my meeting tonight, but I'll go tomorrow. I'll call my sponsor in a couple of days. It's not that big of a deal. I can handle it. Things are going really good. Or no one's going to know if I just go to the bar tonight. No one will see it. I can hide it. Whatever it might be. Yeah. But with food, too, is the same thing of, I'm just trying to, hiding food, maybe eating somewhere where people can't see, that manipulation. No, I already ate. Don't worry about me when you haven't. Or maybe I haven't eaten, so let's go out. Well, maybe you have eaten and you want to overeat. Defenses pop up, so that manipulation, hiding, avoidance, withdrawal, isolation, all of those things pop up. So remember, those are the behaviors that happen before the actual substance abuse or changes through food or drug. Stigma, I think we talked a lot about it kind of leading up to this, but we talk about advertising, we talk about media. Some people still have that idea that alcoholic is the person in the trench coat living underneath the bridge. People still believe that. They have a hard time. There's a lot of shame there. But there's a lot of stigma and weight bias as well that goes on in our society. And in fact, that's a lot more prevalent. It's still really one of the biggest prejudices that are out there. People still do it. We know that that's true. We've seen the studies. We've seen people who on the talk shows think it's a good idea to dress in fat suits and see how people treat them differently. It's a great study. Psychologically, it's probably not the best thing that we can do to kind of show what goes on. But we get a lot of stigma from many sources. It leads to secrecy, guilt, shame, embarrassment. But I think when we take a look at working with physicians and doctors in the healthcare system, there's still weight bias in that too. There's a lot of assumptions that get made. There's a lot of things that happen in school. People get bullied a lot for their weight. They get made fun of. They get passed up for jobs. There's a lot of weight bias that's still out there. And continued use despite negative consequences. We can have many consequences but not be able to stop. So I might have 3 DUIs, a drunk in public, court fees out the wazoo, or maybe I just have alienated my entire family and they don't want to hang out with me anymore because I'm drinking all the time and I make a stupid fool of myself. It's a negative consequence. If I have food, if I'm eating, I'm overfull, I'm making myself physically uncomfortable, I'm messing up the chemicals in my body, maybe I'm abusing laxatives or diuretics. That's really dangerous, we know that. Or even if it's heart palpitations. I'm having heart palpitations, but maybe I don't want to acknowledge that. I'm not feeling well. No one wants to hang out with me anymore because I won't eat with them, or I always make comments about food. Those are negative consequences too. It isolates me from my family. So these are all sorts of different negative consequences: diabetes, heart disease, obesity, relationship issues, heart and organ failure, dental issues, muscle atrophy, family and relationship issues. All of those are negative consequences. And they all have a really high prevalence of co-occurring disorders. Approximately 50% with substance dependence have other co-occurring stuff of depression, anxiety, ADHD. We see it a lot here at Farley. I'm sure you guys see it in your patients. Rarely do people come in as one-trick ponies. Toronto York University in a study found that it's common for compulsive eaters to also have depression or ADD, ADHD. And then there's new research that finds that social anxiety and eating disorders have higher comorbidity rates. Some of these other shared risk factors: brain chemistry, low self-esteem, impulsivity, history of abuse and trauma, unhealthy parental behaviors and low monitoring of children's activities, unhealthy peer norms, social pressures, messages from media. These are also some other ones that just kind of pop up. There's a lot of medical similarities. I'm not an MD, so I'm not going to get into too much. Valerie talked a lot about it, but there is a lot that we know in terms of the brain and the body. Similars in the cortico-hypofrontality and the prefrontal cortex. That's a nice article. If you want some explanation better than I can as not a doctor, go ahead and read that. But there's also some differences. One of the biggest differences is in terms of treatment. Well, we can't have abstinence with an eating disorder. We can't just not eat. In fact, that is that eating disorder, right? Yes. So that is one of the bigger challenges, is finding out, we can abstain from drugs and alcohol, and we can really push for that, and people can be healthy from it, but how do we do that with food? What does that look like? I'm a firm believer that all foods fit, but I also believe in problematic foods. So that would be that all foods fit, meaning let's get you, but you have problematic foods, meaning let's get you on a plan that you feel comfortable, that you feel safe with, and then as you get more comfortable, let's go ahead and add in some of those fear foods, if you want them, if that's important to you. Or are you okay with eliminating them completely from your diet? If you are, then we can keep them out. You don't have to have them in there, but if you do, let's bring in some fear foods. Let's talk about why they're so scary for you. Body image distortions are more extreme in eating disorders. Individualized boundaries in food behaviors, food types, and meal plans. So there has to be more flexibility in working from client to client. It can't be just that don't drink, don't use, go to meetings. There's a lot more flexibility that we have to have in working with each client. There is a greater female to male prevalence in eating disorders and substance abuse, and that changes a lot of how we work with people, because females you work differently with than males. But again, that is rapidly changing. We're seeing a lot more males going into treatment for eating disorders. There's more of an impact on media and culture on development of eating disorders. We've kind of normalized, I think in like 70s, 80s, more drugs and alcohol were used in TV. It's just kind of now been something that we're used to. We tolerate a lot better. Back in the day, having someone drink a glass of wine was really taboo on TV, right? Now it's so prevalent in TV show you don't even notice it. But the pictures of really thin women, really muscular men, I mean, we take a look at media and you've got the male roles, right? So there's like 3 key types. You've got the really geeky, nerdy, smart guy. You've got, and he's usually pretty thin, right? Tall, thin, willowy. You've got the funny fat friend. That would be like your Kevin James, or people who really use their weight as part of their humor. And then you've got that really muscular Shamar Moore, Criminal Minds kind of guy, right? Those are 3 subtypes. Rarely are we seeing, and we're seeing some shift. Mike and Molly was a huge, huge movement of making main characters that weren't your typical thin Hollywood type. But boy, did people rebel against that. I mean, I don't know if you guys read some of the articles about that. Someone even wrote, "It's so disgusting to watch two pigs kiss on a TV show. Why would I watch this?" They wrote that in a review about the show. So we're moving, but there's still a whole lot of resistance. There's a lot of stigma around obese, and especially with males with eating disorder. There's less recognition of an eating disorder as a brain disease with genetic and biochemical components. They just need to eat. They just need to stop eating so much. They need to stop throwing up. Less availability of 12-step groups. That's a really big one. There is less availability of support groups for an eating disorder. I believe there is only one EDA meeting in the entire state of Virginia. And I believe it's in Richmond on Monday or Wednesday night. There are some Overeaters Anonymous groups, but they're very few and far in between. So a lot of people, I do recommend trying a 12-step meeting like AA or NA and seeing if they can change what they see in drugs and alcohol to food for them and see if they can relate to that. But there is less support groups for them. There's a lot of online groups, absolutely. And that's one of the things I recommend a lot is, call in, Skype in. There's a lot of Skype ones or video chat ones. But in terms of actually going to a meeting, there's a lot less, and that's hard because we know a support system, a sponsor, building up people around you that are also struggling with the same things is really helpful. That's why one of the good things about Weight Watchers, though, is that the meetings are like a support group. So that's kind of a nice support system within that.
A brief aside, speaking of Mike and Molly, Mike had lost 50 pounds, and he had a relapse. Mm-hmm. And he showed up at, it was actually a very well done show. He showed up at his OA. He said, I know that when I stand here, I normally talk about how much weight I've lost. Instead, I have to talk about how I'm finally getting, this is what I'm going to have to do the rest of my life. It was so powerful. Mm-hmm. And it's a Michael Molly show where you would not expect that. Mm-hmm. But that's because they broke the mold in the
Absolutely. So hopefully that we can still see people moving in that direction, more shows like that, more main characters that kind of exemplify the more human side of things rather than Hollywood expectation. These are some really good articles and research. Mark Gold, the one at the end, is the guy at University of Florida. He does a lot of really great research. SugarAwareness.com. There's actually a Sugar Awareness Week every year. I didn't know that. But they actually, on their website, have a lot of really good articles on sugar addiction and sugar impacts on the body if you're interested. But also look at NEDA, beta-IADEP. All of those things have really good stuff. I also say keep it simple when you're looking at diagnosis. Is there impulsivity? Is there compulsivity? And continued use despite negative consequences. Those seem to be some of those three main traits. Look for those. Keep it simple. Work with your client. Be where they're at. And, of course, searching for balance. Really right on the dot. I'll let if you guys want to stay for questions, we'll still be here. But I know that people have to run out the door. I apologize. Any questions?